Open the podcast doors, Hal.
It's Kubrick's Universe, the Stanley Kubrick Podcast.
Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning in once again to this frequency, Kubrick's Universe. Howard Berry is a filmmaker, broadcaster, film consultant, oral historian, and postgraduate film production course leader and principal lecturer in post-production at the University of Hertfordshire. He has worked as a VFX editor on a number of feature films including Green Zone, Scott Pilgrim, Harry Potter, and Kick-Ass, as well as editing short oral histories on Jim Henson's Labyrinth and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Howard has worked as an editor on a number of highly successful independent films and has created content for the BBC as well as for DVD and Blu-ray special features. He has experience as a producer of short dramas and documentaries, including the award-winning documentary On the Banks of the Bean. Most recently, he directed a documentary about 35mm moviola film editing with Walter Murch and Mike Leigh, which also involved filming with Stanley Kubrick's Steenbeck. Howard leads the Elstree Project, which is an oral history of the 6 film and television studios in Boreham Wood and Elstree. His interviewees include Steven Spielberg, Simon Pegg, Brian Blessed, Sir Roger Moore, among almost 80 interviews with crew and cast members who worked on productions in the various studios from the 1950s to the present day. Howard is somewhat of a Stanley Kubrick expert and is a friend of and has worked closely with the Kubrick estate over the last 10 years on many Kubrick-specific projects such as the highly acclaimed oral history about the making of The Shining, Staircases to Nowhere, with several Kubrick family members and close collaborators. Howard was also commissioned to create 2 new video works to showcase 2001 A Space Odyssey materials for the Deutsche Film Museum. In 2015, he conceived and organized the 35th anniversary of The Shining event, which reunited 26 cast and crew members. He launched the official Stanley Kubrick social media pages with a Facebook Live broadcast from the touring Kubrick exhibition at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, and was invited to deliver the 2nd annual Kubrick lecture at the Design Museum in London. Howard also recreated the special effects of 2001 A Space Odyssey for the BBC's flagship magazine show, The One Show. For 6 years, he worked as the UK lead researcher for the recently released official book on the making of The Shining by Lee Unkrich. And we recorded this interview with Howie in March 2020. So, hello, Howie, are you there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here. That makes me sound like I've been very busy.
Well, I'm imagining you certainly must have been, based on that, because I feel like, rather tuckered out just reading all that, and I was just reading.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I mean, it's been 10 years, I suppose, of doing this kind of stuff, so lots of gaps in between, perhaps.
Well, it doesn't sound like too many to us, and enough to keep you busy with so many things. Kubrick. So, and this is fascinating. So I'm just going to get into it, if I may.
Yeah.
Howie, just begin by telling us about the Elstree Project and how you got involved with that.
The Elstree Project came about as a result of a Kubrick project, and neither of which were really planned to be projects of any kind of scale, really. What was happening was that there was going to be an exhibition of Stanley Kubrick in his hometown in St Albans Museum, and I don't think they'd ever done an exhibition before, and despite the fact that he'd lived there. So it was going to be a special exhibition, and the museum approached the university where I work to partner with them to collaborate on some of the content that they wanted to go into the museum. They had some of our model design students make kind of miniatures, recreations of some of the scenes from the films, and some things like that. And they asked the film course, what would we like to do? And a colleague of mine spoke to me about it, and I said, well, why don't we interview people who worked with him to get the real story rather than try and make something up ourselves, or add to something when there's already people out there who could give the real deal.
Sure.
So we did some interviews with the Kubrick family. I knew Jan Harlan already. He'd been a friend of mine since earlier that same year. And so I went to Jan and said, Jan, do you think this would be possible to interview some of Stanley's family and collaborators? And he said, I'll give you some names. That was that. So he was very keen and said, yeah, absolutely. He arranged for us to go and interview Katharina and Christiana and Tony Palmer, who was a good long-time friend of Stanley's, and several other people as well. We interviewed Sir Ken Adam. And then I got in touch with a group called Elstree Screen Heritage, and they provided us with a further 4 interviewees. And
oh, wow.
So that was our little kind of mini bubble of Kubrick interviews that we did, and it was all Kubrick. The whole thing was specifically about Stanley Kubrick. And because I enjoyed that so much, and I'd had a pretty good time, I think it has to be said, getting to listen to amazing people tell incredible production stories about someone who I thought was amazing. I went back to Elstree Screen Heritage and said, look, we had a lot of fun with this, and the 4 guys that you brought to me, could we do more? And they said, well, I kind of think we've exhausted as many people that we can who know about Stanley Kubrick. And I said, no, not just Stanley Kubrick. How about Elstree? Stupid me thinking it was one studio or, just a small thing, and not realizing that at that point there was almost 100 years worth of history and 6 different studios and demolitions and all sorts of things that had gone on in the history of the studios there. So then suddenly their eyes kind of opened wide and went, are you sure? And I thought, what are you talking about? Of course I'm sure. Let's do it. And then realized about 10 interviews in, oh my gosh, this is a big thing.
You've opened Pandora's box.
That was it. And I said, well, they said, how many do you think we could do in a year? And for us, talking about an academic year, so between October and end of April, really. And I said, well, let's try and do 2 a month or so. And I think in the first year, we interviewed 14 people. And we just didn't stop. We carried on for 6 years doing that.
Wow.
That was kind of good fun. So that's how the Elstree Project came about. And in fact, the first person that we interviewed under the official kind of Elstree Project, not being what we were calling Kubrick Visions at the time, we have a strand of activity that we call Visions as part of the film course. So I kind of lumped it in with that. The first person we interviewed was June Randall, who of course had plenty to say about Stanley Kubrick.
It was all very, very long hours, but Jack Nicholson was brilliant on it. He never forgot a line, and he used to go back to his room and he used to just he's fine. Everybody was very good, and I'll never the first day on that, this Scatman Crowther. And Stanley was said to me, go and see if he knows his lines. Okay, I was doing as I'm told. So I went up and said, excuse me, Mr. Crowther, do you know your lines? Are you okay? He said, I only do my lines with Mr. Kubrick. I said, oh, okay. So I went off somewhere. So Stanley, does he know his lines? I said, he'll only do them with you. So he went over to him. He said, when I tell someone like June to do something, that's law. I want her to do the lines with you. Oh, I am so sorry. Yeah. I'll do my lines. I couldn't get rid of him. Do you want to know my lines now? Do you? I said, no, I know your lines. You know, you're fine. No, I'd like to do my anyway. One day we did a shot. He never knew his lines.
The thing about June that I loved was that she had a glint in her eye when she would talk about a story and an anecdote about a personal relationship with anyone. It didn't matter who it was. She really, you could see the kind of warmth and appreciation just kind of fill her face. And she was very much appreciative and warmed about Stanley, which was so charming because she went through all sorts of interesting episodes with him. She ended up working for him purely by accident. She walked into his office and he kind of said, "Yes, I'll hire you." And she wasn't looking for work at the time. She'd gone into the studio to visit someone who had, I think they'd had maternity leave and they'd just come back, and she thought she'd go in to visit them. And next thing, she was in Stanley's office, saying, "Can you write notes? And are you good at organization?" And yes, thanks, you're hired.
Wow.
And that was A Clockwork Orange. But yeah, she had some very fun stories about, just his habits of how he would work, and how he'd work the crew. And I think she told me that she had a Big Mac every day for 3 months or something like that. It was so funny because if the crew ate what Stanley ate, so Stanley decided that week he liked Big Macs, they had Big Macs.
Right.
So, and then because he was a creature of habit, he didn't change until he got sick of it. So yeah, imagine that 3 month every night, apart from Fridays where they had fish and chips.
That's great.
And so it was fun talking to her like that because she really lit up when she could tell stories like that.
Well, it seems like she got the job somewhat similarly to how other folks got the job. We've heard stories of people finding their way into his office, and after a conversation, yes, you're hired.
Yeah. I think he was very good at assessing, is this person someone who can do something useful? Yes or no? And if the answer is yes, they're useful, they were hired. So.
Right. Very intuitive, as it seems to relate to so many other aspects of what made him tick, for lack of a better expression.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now, the Elstree Project led to your amazing documentary, Staircases to Nowhere. So we here at Kubrick's Universe have seen and love this documentary. But for many of our listeners who have yet to catch up with it, can you explain to them what this is and how it came about?
Yeah, so Staircases to Nowhere it's almost an hour-long oral history of The Shining, and I tried to organize it in kind of chapters about either certain things that you see on screen, certain iconic moments, or certain parts of the production. And it was a total accident that I made it, which sounds very weird because I spent a lot of time on it, but it came about completely by accident. I was approached to conceive of a series of screenings of films made locally at Elstree by the university. They had run cinema screenings in our auditorium previously, but hadn't really drawn much of an audience. And they asked me, I'll just stop. The cat has decided to scratch the furniture.
No, it's
there
okay.
We go. Right, there we are. Yeah. I knew he would.
It's okay. He's doing his thing.
Yeah, he's making his presence felt.
We all know Stanley loved cats. Perhaps
that's he's channeling him.
What is your cat's name?
His name's Milo.
Milo, I love it.
Yeah.
Milo might have something to say.
He might contribute. Going back, so screenings. Yes, so the university had previously held a lot of screenings in the cinema, and audiences weren't brilliant. I've got to say, they were getting maybe 20 people coming, and to a 400-seater auditorium, that feels very, very empty. So they said to me, "Can we work with you? Will you come up with a program? You've been doing all this work on Elstree. Can we show some films made at Elstree?" And I said, "Yeah, great, let's do it." So I said, "Look, let's add a little bit of extra content, though. It's fine just to put on a film, but that, people can watch those on the TV all the time, or they've got them already on DVD. What's going to make this feel like it's worth coming out in the rain for, to a university campus?" So I said, let's do an introduction to every single one with an expert, and let's include clips from our archive of people who've worked on the films talking about the films. And so I deliberately scheduled the first 3 films that we chose. One of them was Labyrinth.
Oh, yes.
We did Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and we did The Shining. And I deliberately picked those because we had crew members who had worked on those, and not just one or two, but maybe three at least. So therefore I could cut together maybe, between a 5 and 10 minute oral history, just briefly to help tell the story of the fact that it was made in our local studio and it meant something to the local area. And that's why we were watching this film. So that's what I did. And the Shining one, I got a little self-indulgent and made a 22 or so minute cut and didn't trim it. I thought, oh, well, they can sit through that and enjoy it or not. But I had five people in the cut for that first one. And afterwards, I released all 3 of these oral histories onto Vimeo.
Mm-hmm.
And within a week, we had 45,000 hits on The Shining.
Wow.
And that with no publicity at all.
Right, right.
I didn't tell anyone I was releasing them. I just put them out there. And I just went onto Twitter and said, I've made this little video. If you're interested in this film, feel free to watch it. That was the level of publicity it got. And so when we got 45,000 hits in a week, I thought, okay, there's something in this. Maybe people are interested in this subject. So then I decided to go and recut this and also add more people to interview. And so I highlighted a few names that I thought I might be able to get in contact with, including Doug Milsom, who I was particularly keen to meet anyway, and Brian Cook. And I added another 5 people and recut it into about a 55-minute long oral history now.
Wow.
And so that's how it came about. It was a complete freak accident. I had no idea anyone was going to be interested whatsoever. And then when I did that, then I just put it on Vimeo, and Lee Unkrich very kindly had tweeted about it, and he'd put it on the Overlook Hotel website that he runs. And a few other people picked it up, and then movies.com picked it up and wrote a review of it, bizarrely, where they said this may just be the best documentary or on The Shining ever made, which is hilariously ridiculous, seeing as Vivian Kubrick was there,
right.
made a document. So it's, I mean, not only is that complete hyperbole and nonsense, but it was at the same time I was like, well, they said it and it wasn't me, so I'll take it, thanks. But it was it was a very bizarre reaction that I got that I wasn't expecting. And so, yeah, that was really nice. And a lot of people have still say to me that they've enjoyed it. It's really weird. You get 2 reactions: people who really loved it and said, I found it fascinating, and other people who go, well, it's just a bunch of old people talking.
Oh gosh.
And I was like, well,
right.
It kind of is a bunch of old people talking, but that's because we're talking about a film that was made 40 years ago. So
yeah, you can't have oral history.
Yeah.
You cannot have oral history without a bunch of old people talking, but heaven forbid that's where, some younger people actually gain some insight into their wisdom.
That's it.
But, therein lies the heart of the matter.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's a joy to go and talk to these people anyway. I am now really good friends with Doug Milsom, and I consider that such a joy to have built friendships as a result of a project that when I started the project, I just thought, wouldn't it be nice to once a month film some people talking about their work? That was the intention. It was never, we must be preserving history, or it was just, wouldn't this be a nice thing to do? And I've got friends, lifelong friends, as a result of that, and many of them from the Kubrick side of the project.
Now, many of our listeners, of course, do know who Doug Milsom is, being, Kubrick files, either lifelong or new to the discipline, if you will. But for those who don't, would you mind just sharing a brief explanation of who this fascinating guy is?
Yeah, so Doug Milsom worked with Stanley, I believe, on 4 films, one of the rare crew members to work on him with him repeatedly. He was a focus puller on Barry Lyndon, which I think must have been one of the hardest jobs ever in cinema. Because the keeping focus on that film, where if people moved a kind of centimeter out, they went out of focus, must have been absolutely nerve-wracking beyond belief. And they invented an incredibly clever system where he had a video camera at an angle of 90 degrees to the main camera, with a grid marked on the screen so that he could actually see when people moved closer or further away to the camera based on this grid, and then remotely adjust the focus, which I think is ingenious. And then of course he worked on The Shining. He was second unit camera operator for the Shining. He went out in the snow and filmed the Timberline Lodge with Jan Harlan, who was the exec producer. And he shot all of those shots of the actual real hotel exterior, from the ground. He didn't do the helicopter stuff, but he did the stuff on the ground. And then, he moved up to become the director of photography on Full Metal Jacket. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think what else he worked on. It may be that he worked on Eyes Wide Shut as well.
He did have a credit on Eyes Wide Shut.
I'm not too sure if he actually was just I think he was just an advisor. I don't think he actually was on set, because Larry Smith was the DOP.
Yes.
For Eyes Wide Shut.
It was a focus advisor, I believe, if not uncredited.
So that makes sense. That makes sense. Maybe they were using certain lenses that Doug had used as part of Stanley's kit on previous films, and they'd called him and said, how did you do this, or what stuff did you work on that he's got in the kit room? And Doug probably said, "Oh, right. Yeah, he's got this, this, and this. Go and get those things. That's what you want." It could be something like that.
Right. And still, I mean, having worked on 4 films with Stanley is, quite a feat when you consider all the variables, not the least of which, Stanley's propensity to introduce new talent into his crew. That's right, as he moved along. He must have really had a good relationship with Doug.
I think so. And you can see it in the behind-the-scenes photos that occasionally get passed around on the internet on The Shining. You can see Doug, he's very much involved, because after he did the second unit shoot, he came back to the sets in Boreham Wood, and he was focus assistant for Garrett Brown on the Steadicam as well. And so he's in the background a lot in a lot of shots. And you could tell there must have been a very good relationship and atmosphere on set, and when Doug's certainly around, there's a lot of smiles. That's great.
And with Doug in mind, there must have been a great many other interviews that we can assume you enjoyed conducting, and I'd be loath if I forgot to ask, how many interviews roughly in total, Howie, did you conduct for Staircases to Nowhere? And there's a second part to that question.
Well, I think I must now have maybe 16 interviews. And if you're looking for when am I updating the cut with the other 6?
Yes.
Is that what the second part was going to be? Then I would still like to do that, because I now have Joe Turkel. I have the twins. I'd love to do a recut. I'd love to expand it, obviously. I think the film now exists as it does. And if I recut it, I'd rather recut it into something maybe slightly different. And there's still people that I'd want to interview to make it special enough. Not that I'm saying the other people that aren't in the cut at the moment that are not special enough to make it, but I'd love to go and sit with Danny and talk to Danny, because I've spoken to him many times, through Twitter and things like that, and he was very kindly contributed to the 35th anniversary screening. But it would be something like that where I'd want to really kind of say, look, here we go. Here is now, X, Y, and Z are also now in it, to give it a reason to have a new cut. I think. I think the interviews that I've done since can exist with a life of their own anyway, because Joe Turkel, as you've interviewed him as well, he's a rather special guy, And
Oh, yes.
and an interview with Joe stands up on its own. An interview with the twins is an interesting experience all on its own as well, in the most kind of incredibly crazy and exciting and fun and kind of nuts kind of way. I think they probably can exist as an accompaniment to what already is out there now. But yeah, maybe one day I'll come back and do an extended cut, which is basically what that would be, because this is already the extended cut.
Well, you can just rebrand it as something like Elevators to Somewhere.
That would be a good one. I mean, the name came from Julian Senior. Julian, who was the Warner Brothers publicist, and before Warner's, he was MGM, so he followed Stanley as he moved. He was the one who said the line "staircases to nowhere," and it just kind of stuck out to me. He was just remarking about how when you walk around the backlot of studios, that's what you see, a bunch of staircases all going nowhere. Mm-hmm.
I love that title. Great title.
Yeah, it just stood out, and I don't know why I picked it, other than I like the sound of it, because it has no real relation to The Shining. Elevators definitely does. Blood elevators to somewhere, that could be.
Well, that was Stephen's joke, to be fair and give credit, but the title itself has always stood out to me because, I've been a fan of The Shining since about 1982. And when I discovered it, I was 12 years old. And, there was something about watching the film, I've said this before on the show, that was more than any other aspect of it, just hypnotic to me. And it was upon repeated viewings that I began to look at the sets and just look at all of those staircases and the corridors and where are they going, and like how big can this set possibly be? Yeah. And I began to break it down at some point and see things that were much later, examined in, apart from other things, of course, the Room 237 documentary, which people can have their own opinion of it. That's fine. But it did seem to, on a technical level, confirm all those things that I had been looking at from the point of view of a viewer who has seen it umpteen times, and looking at the staircases and just going, well, they must go to nowhere.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, the main staircase in the Colorado Lounge, you must walk up it, and they had a balcony, sure, but after you kind of get out of sight of what the camera sees, it just probably drops off the edge. So
it's just, I mean, it's great, but you always imagine that somewhere just hiding around the corner, of those shots you don't see, must, certainly be ambling about, shall we say, all the best people.
Yeah.
I digress. So I did have a second part to that question, Howie. I mean, roughly how many hours worth of footage about The Shining were you able to get for staircases?
There's probably about 20 hours or so that I cut down into the 1 hour. Because every interview is about 2 hours long. And when I decided to do the recut from the 20-minute version to the hour-long version, the people that I interviewed afterwards, those 5 extra people, they were deliberately to talk about The Shining in particular. So, yeah, I mean, with Doug, I obviously spoke about other aspects of working with Stanley, and with a few other people, I digressed into talking more about Elstree as well. But really the focus of each of those interviews was The Shining. So I think, it must be about 20 hours of content or so related to The Shining in interviews that I've got.
Wow. Any plans to put that on Vimeo?
It's all going on Vimeo within the next 18 months. Everything.
The whole 20 hours.
Not just that, the entire Elstree project, with the exception of 2 or 3 interviews, which the Spielberg interview I can't publish publicly. I'm allowed to use it myself, and people can come to the university and listen to it, but we have a separate agreement about how that can be used. You know, it's Steven Spielberg. I did as I was told.
Right.
But pretty much everything else will be going live starting from sometime this month. We'll be putting things up. And so all the names in the interviews page on the Elstree Project will eventually all become links. And you'll be able to watch the full unedited interviews. And then after we've gone through and done all of those, then the next step is that there will also be an accompanying transcript in PDF format with time code, which will then also go up alongside those as well.
So Howie, the Elstree Project, a home of one's own, celebrating Edgwarebury House Hotel. This is another really cool documentary which has a Kubrick connection, namely being the location used for Alex's attempted suicide in A Clockwork Orange. So can you tell our listeners about this one?
Yeah, Edgwarebury, I had an opportunity to go and visit the hotel because it had just been bought by Laura Ashley, the clothes company. And that struck me as slightly bizarre. I didn't know Laura Ashley did hotels, but they were converting Edgwarebury House, which had been a hotel of some kind for numerous years, on the outskirts of Elstree. And so they invited us down to record the interior and exterior, which was rather nice, just before they'd opened. So we weren't disturbing any of their guests. And Edgwarebury has been used as the location for so many different films, and being so close to the studios, that must be largely the reason why. But it's kind of very old-fashioned looking manor house, very large manor house, and it used to have a big kind of ornamental flower bed in an oval shape, like a roundabout, at the front of it, and it appeared in all sorts of programs, like from the 60s, Randall and Hopkirk deceased, and the Champions and the Avengers, and a lot of these kind of really great cult TV shows. And then it was really The Devil Rides Out, one of the Hammer horror films, which is set in almost entirely, the second half of the film is set in that house, which is just great because it's really spooky. And then later in A Clockwork Orange, it's featured in A Clockwork Orange, and Alex is locked up in the I think in the attic, and it's where he leaps out of the window after not being able to take the music being played anymore, the Beethoven, and so he leaps out of the window on the top floor, and Stanley actually took his camera and threw it out of the window to get that shot. That's what I believe is the truth of that. And it landed intact, amazingly, I think, so I believe. But that's how they did the shot of Alex throwing himself out of the window. And that was Edgwarebury.
Right. And of course his camera would land intact because, why wouldn't the fates be smiling upon him?
Exactly.
At all turns.
What I liked about it was being able to visit it. I didn't appreciate from the film, from A Clockwork Orange itself, that, because I'm so used to people building sets, and things not being real when I watch a film, that actually, yes, they did really film up on that top floor. They really did throw the camera out of that window. And the massive drop that there is actually from how high that window is. I had no concept of that, until I actually had the chance to stand there in the grounds and look up and see the actual window. So that was quite a treat. That was quite a nice experience, just to relate to the actual physical location of the film and stand on that spot.
Very cool. So to segue into your next project that you worked on, of course, the Shining 35th anniversary event in 2015. This was pretty widely publicized on social media and the internet in general. And I want to get to asking you about your personal experience with that. But firstly, I do know that Stephen, our producer, Stephen Rigg, was fortunate enough to attend this amazing event. And I want to hear from both of you. First, Stephen, can you tell us what your memory is of being there?
Yes, it was absolutely brilliant. What an event. The fact that all those cast and crew members who had been reading about for so long, the fact that they were all there, a few of them even took to the stage for kind of a short Q&A. What an event, and seeing the film on the big screen. I think that was probably the first time I'd seen The Shining on the big screen as well. Yeah, so this was.
Oh, really?
I think so, yeah, this was 2015. I've seen it a few times
Wow.
since. I think that was the first time I saw it on the big screen in 2015, and yeah, it was a wonderful event. You did a great job of pulling that one off, Howie. Yeah,
it was an interesting achievement.
How long was that in the workings? Howie, how long did it take to get that together?
I think I suggested it to Lee Unkrich a year before it happened. I think I said, wouldn't it be nice if I could get some of these people together again and see if we can do that? And I knew it was at least a year in advance, because then, I'd already made friends with so many of the crew. I knew Kelvin Pike very well, who was the camera operator. I knew Doug, and by this point as well, I knew the twins. And I'd been working with Lee Unkrich and had met him a couple of times out in California. And I wanted to do something for all of these people who'd been so generous to me. And so this was what made sense, which sounds like a very daft thing for to do such a huge undertaking. But the thing with the oral histories and with the Elstree Project was so many people had been so kind with their time and with their personal memories, and to be kind enough to share deeply personal memories with me, knowing, that the point of the project is to share that. I really did feel like I'd wanted to do something like that. And I particularly wanted to do something for Lee Unkrich, who had been extremely generous in inviting me to visit him in Pixar Studios, to talk about The Shining with him and his interest in The Shining, and what he was looking to do at the time. And I had introduced him to many of my interviewees, given him an introduction to them. And so I said, well, look, I've introduced you to them and you've kind of spoken to them maybe over Skype or in an email. Wouldn't you like to meet them? And he said, well, yeah, sure. So that was enough for me to get the ball rolling. So it took a year. I wrote to maybe 32 or so crew members, ended up with 26 confirming. I think on the day we ended up with 25, one suddenly couldn't make it due to illness. But everyone else came. And one of the nice things was that I tried to keep this as up to date as possible on social media so that people knew it was going to happen, because I didn't think this would happen ever again. And I thought this is the right time. A lot of these people are elderly. We need to make the 35th happen. So I tried to let everyone know that I was going to do this event. I kept saying, I haven't got a date yet. I haven't got a venue. But if I could do this, would you like to come? And people all said yes. Is there a Facebook group we could join, or is there an event page that we can join, which you can just keep updated? And so I set that up. And then Jan and I went to the local cinema, the Odyssey, which had only just opened within the last year.
In St Albans.
In St Albans. And it had been closed for over 20 years, or almost 20 years. And it had only just reopened after a multi-million-pound refurbishment. And Jan was one of the people who helped. They did a call for people to donate. And Jan was one of the donors. So he knew the man who had led this refurbishment, James Hanaway. And he invited me and James to a meeting where Jan said, Howard's got this event and we should screen it in your cinema. And James went, okay, who are you? When he looked at me, and I went, I'm Howard. Hello, I'm the one with the event. So he said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, we're going to do this. It's rather special. And he kind of looked at me, and I think he kind of thought, who on earth is this guy that Jan has brought? So he said to me, well, no one knows who you are, so you can't go on stage. And you shouldn't introduce it. It should be someone who's someone who they know. And I said, no, hang on. I've spent almost a year on this. This was, maybe 2 months, 3 months before the screening happened. So I'd spent 9 months on it, and everyone that I'd written to had said, yes, we'll be there. So I kind of said, no, this event doesn't happen without me. So I finally convinced him to allow me to introduce Lee to then do the Q&A, because he didn't want me doing it. And that was fine. I didn't want to do the Q&A. Lee was much better to do that. But I actually had to fight to get on stage for my own event, which was very bizarre. And I told them, look, I'm doing all this for free. I'm not paid to do any extra work like this. And I would really appreciate it if we could set a price on the tickets that would involve some money being donated to the Elstree Project so I can continue some activities, because our trip to America, where we interviewed Spielberg and Joe Turkel and Walter Murch, had cost me personally over £3,000 of my own money. Mm-hmm. And I'd taken 5 students with me to have that experience. And he said, no, we sell our tickets at our price and we take the full amount.
Oh boy.
And I was very close to saying this isn't going to work. And I also said, you're going to get a lot of interest internationally for this. I hope that you're prepared for your ticket sales. And the response I got from that was, no, we're a local cinema. It's a local thing. We'll only get local interest. And at the time, they didn't have online booking. They only had telephones.
Oh, gosh.
Where they could take bookings. And I said, look, you're going to get phone calls. You believe me? You're going to get phone calls. And I it kind of was like, oh, yeah, sure. Anyway, I emailed them the day before I said the tickets should go live. I emailed them and said, look, just to remind you, you're going to get interest, because I've now seen on the Facebook event page, there are people who have definitely said they're coming, and people who are coming from thousands of miles to be here. And again, it was within 7 hours, they'd sold all 450 tickets. And people came from California and Canada and Texas and from Scandinavia and I don't know where else. But that was hilarious and lovely. It was so nice to have that support from people who wanted to come. But it was kind of hilarious because when I went into the cinema 2 days later and said, how are the sales doing? I was met by 2 very worn-out looking people who kind of went, the phones didn't stop ringing. The phones never stopped ringing.
Wow.
You were right. You were right. We begrudgingly admit.
I never got
we
that.
should have listened to you. Yeah, of course not. Of course not.
I don't want that. I wasn't looking for that, but it was funny. So yeah, they sold out within just over 7 hours, which was rather good.
I can imagine.
And people who attended only saw half the event, because there was another half beforehand where I took all the crew. Elstree Studios invited us to be their guests, and they very kindly put on a buffet lunch for all the guests and their partners. And
of Big Macs.
Not Big Macs.
Of Big Macs, yes.
yeah. Or fish and chips. Yeah, that's all we were like. They put on a fantastic buffet, and I had the joy with Lee, who had his iPad with original photos that he'd been given by various people of the sets, and he was walking along the back lot with a group of them, and they were pointing to trees and things, saying that's where the exterior of this was, that's where that was. And the editors, the naughty editors, because I asked for a group photo, and the 4 editors are not in the group photo, because they snuck off into the building that we now call the Enigma building, which is where their cutting room was, and they broke in and went upstairs to look at their old cutting room when we were having the photo taken.
Right at the moment you needed them in the shot, of course.
Well, typical editors, they edited themselves out. So
Right.
So, Gordon Stainforth was there, and he's not in the photo and things. But, it was that I didn't mind. And we all had cake. I had a special cake made, which was a red velvet cake, but it was covered in yellow, shining poster coloured yellow icing. And I got Jan to cut it with a plastic toy axe. And when you cut in, of course, all you could see was the red. So he thought that was rather funny.
Brilliant.
He initially looked at me and said, Howard, what is this nonsense with this axe? And then when I told him, then he couldn't put the axe down, and he was like a child in the sweet shop. So that was quite fun.
Oh, that's great.
So we had a lovely visit. Yeah, it was fun. And it was very kind of Elstree to host that and provide that for us. And then we had a coach company who gave us a double-decker bus for free, who couriered all of us from the studio to the cinema, to then arrive for everyone else. And Warner Brothers paid for the logo boards that people were getting their photos in front of. And they, it added to it. It made it feel very special. I was supported by so many people to make that happen. Jan and the Kubrick family, the cinema, despite the issues I had with them, I'd still go back to them for something else in the future. I think, it worked. So, that's all that matters.
Now, the double-decker bus, is it safe to assume that the ghost of Stanley forced the Warner Brothers executives to remain on the bus and not come near the set?
Well, the Warner's people were all there at the studio as well. They were doing a very good job looking after guests. And it was the least I could do to give them a nice lunch, seeing as they gave me an extremely brand new, pristine DCP of the film to screen at the cinema.
Oh, yes.
It was a fantastic quality print that we got. And Warner's gave that to us.
So, Howie, in regards to the 35th anniversary of the Shining event, most of the guests that attended were, of course, based in the United Kingdom, but then Garrett Brown, inventor of the Steadicam, and Lee Unkrich, we can assume came over from the U.S. Can you tell us a bit about what it took to get them over there, and anything else you want to share?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Both Garrett and Lee travelled from the US, and Diane Johnson as well travelled, I believe, from Paris to be there. And it didn't take much for them to come. I said, would you like to come? And the answer was yes. It was what I was saying about people being so nice is that's exactly it. Garrett didn't ask for any expenses, anything. He came. And it was just, I'd like to be there. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'd met Garrett maybe 4 or 5 months previously, in which I had descended upon him in his hotel at very short notice to do an interview. And we did it in a bar in the hotel in the morning where there were people drilling holes through the wall. So it was not the most ideal of circumstances. And he could have thought, who is this complete nitwit? And yeah, I said, I want to do a reunion. I'm planning this reunion already for the last 6 months. Would you come? It's going to be around the date of the release in May. And he just said, yes, absolutely, right there and then. So it didn't take much to get them to come. Everyone was just so nice. And of course,
great.
Of course, when I said to Lee, Lee, I'm doing this, he said, right, well, I'll have to make sure I get my time off work then. And that was that. So, yeah, it was great. And also to add to the fact that with Garrett Brown coming, Tiffin, the company who now have the license for the Steadicam, provided us with the original Steadicam that Garrett used on the set, which we were able to display on the stage at the Odyssey Cinema as well, which was a real treat. And they provided that again. They turned up with it on the day, set it all up for us, and looked after it. Again, no money, didn't want a penny.
Wow, too cool.
Just happy to do it.
Too cool. And you mentioned Diane Johnson flew over from Paris.
Yeah.
Diane Johnson, of course, she played, a pivotal role in the script and working with Stanley, a very massive part in getting what we all know as the final version of the film and its dialogue, etc. She got that brought to fruition, of course, working with Stanley, the two-fingered typist, that we've... So, what are some of your recollections of being able to chat with her about her experience on The Shining?
Well, I didn't get much of a chance to talk to Diane because what had happened was that she's not one of the people that I filmed an interview with, but I reached out to her thanks to Lee, who gave me her contact information, and he'd been in touch with her and had clearly spoken to her quite a lot about the making of the film and the writing of the script. I'd seen numerous script drafts from having scanned them in the archive. And so when I invited Diane to come, one of the nice coincidences was that she and Lee got on the same train to come up to Boreham Wood for the screening that day. So I think that was the first time they'd met in person, having spoken for so long. So that was a very nice, happy coincidence. And so they arrived at the studio together for the lunch. And that was the first time that I met Diane as she arrived from the station. And so I got to talk to her a little bit about her contribution to the film and the work that she did and what it was like. But I didn't really get to go as in depth because then another 25 people arrived who all had to, be told, come in, there's food, let me show you around. By the way, hi, I'm Howard, I organized this thing. So I didn't get that much of a chance to talk to her. And then I asked her, would you be kind enough to be one of the guests in the Q&A on stage, of which Lee led. So I let, again, Lee spoke to her about the script writing process with Stanley. And I quite rightly kept well out of it. So that was my level really of interaction with Diane.
Interesting. Were there any guests that come to mind that were not able to attend? I believe Dan Lloyd sent in a video piece to be screened.
Dan Lloyd, we'd invited. Lee had invited him on my behalf, and he had just... I think his wife had just given birth to their fourth child at the time, who I think was only maybe 2 months old. And so he said, look, I really would love to come. It's a lovely invite. And in normal circumstances, yes, I would, but I can't do it. And Lee passed that on to me. And I said, that's absolutely fine. I totally understand that. Do you think it's cheeky if I ask him to send a message instead that we could either read out, or even better, that we could play if he got his wife or partner to film it on a mobile phone? And as a result, we got a video from Dan, which was just a lovely surprise for the audience because I didn't tell anyone it was happening.
Oh, that's awesome.
It really was great when that appeared on screen. Yes. And he got his little, one of his youngest sons to ride a tricycle. In the video.
He did. He really thought about how to make it special. And it ends with his son on the little tricycle and he follows him out. And it was a lovely little touch and it was a sweet message and just very kind of Dan to do that because, he didn't know me other than, again, we'd spoken over Twitter a little bit. But out of his own generosity and time, he made that video and it made everyone's day in the cinema. We all really enjoyed it. So it was just such a nice thing for him to be able to do as he couldn't be there himself.
Well, I want to ask on Mark's behalf, Mark Lentz, our great contributor, wonders who took that fantastic photo of everyone on stage at the event.
So I'm lucky. I have a very lovely friend who's a photographer called Isla Desai. And I said to Isla, I'm doing this event. "You're coming, aren't you?" And she said, "Of course." And that was that. So Isla documented the whole event. I, in fact, had 2 students film the event. No one's ever seen the footage.
What?
I've never seen the footage because
What?
I've got it. It's not that they never gave it to me. I've got it, but I was so tired that I thought, I'll look at that later. And later it's turned into 5 years.
Yes.
And now that it's the 40th anniversary, maybe that might be nice to do something with it, because we filmed the Q&A. I don't know what the sound's like for that, because it was difficult with getting a feed with the cinema being a bit funny. But we filmed the whole tour of the backlot of Elstree as well, with the guests that no one's seen. And Isla took a lot of wonderful behind-the-scenes photos with all the guests celebrating and having cake and Jan with the axe. I released a few of those on the day or just after the day. But a lot of it, people haven't seen. I feel very lucky that I have Isla, because she has done photography for me for a number of events, but that one was particularly special. Maybe now I need to dig this out and make some of this available. I am actually working with the official Stanley Kubrick social media to do some content for the 40th anniversary. And they approached me to do about 5 or 6 different things across this year. And I forgot to even mention that I had this footage. So maybe I'm just going to add to my workload. But maybe I'll go back to them and say, by the way, I've got all of this. Let's use some of this as well.
Yeah, I think you should. I mean, they'd be champing at the bit, I would assume. Well, no, I mean, I can certainly see that going forward. I mean, not to be presumptuous, but if they're wise, they would certainly avail themselves of what you're offering. And, just as a footnote for our listeners, it is worth mentioning that the cinema in St. Albans, where this took place, which hosted the 35th event, does have a very apt name. Of course, the cinema at St. Albans is called the Odyssey.
That's right. Yeah. Chosen specifically to recognize the fact that Stanley and the family still are in the city of St. Albans.
Mm-hmm. Real quick, for our listeners who may not be aware of Lee's connection between the Toy Story films and Coco and his other great works for Pixar, and his connection to The Shining and the website he runs, theoverlook.com, can you give our listeners a bit of insight into Lee and or how he came to either your attention or how he came to be involved with The Shining as his own passion project? What were you able to learn about him?
So I first heard of Lee through his work at Pixar. I had no idea that he was a Shining enthusiast, which is an understatement to say the least. And I was following him on Twitter. And when I was younger, I wanted to be an animator. Before I found an interest in editing, I'd wanted to be an animator. And so Pixar films had been of a big interest to me. And Lee had been the editor of the first Toy Story film. And so I was interested in him as someone who not only worked in animation, but also was an editor too. So there were 2 things of interest to me that combined. So I just happened to be casually following him on Twitter in the early days of Twitter. And, that kind of was just sitting there. And one day I saw him tweet something about The Shining. I can't even remember what it was, but I know that he mentioned The Shining in a tweet. And it was about the time when I had made Staircases to Nowhere, the original short version. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote to him and said, "Hello, Lee. I work in the UK, and I've made a little oral history of a bit of The Shining, and perhaps you'd be interested." And I put the link in the tweet. And that was that. Then next thing it was, wow, how did you do that? Who have you met? Who do you know? Right. it was great because then he was instantly interested. I told him about the Elstree Project, which was 3 years in at that point. And what I've been doing, and that I knew Jan very well. Jan and I are very good friends. That I go to dinner with Jan at his house frequently, and that I have, that kind of connection, but I also have access to the studio, because Elstree Studios have been so good to me and allow me access. So I told him all of these things, and so he got very excited, because The Shining is the film that made him want to work in films. When he saw The Shining, he decided that he wanted to be a filmmaker himself. So it means a lot to him, The Shining, in that respect anyway. The fact that he loves the film itself as well. It didn't just spark off that one thing, but he is truly, truly obsessed with the film. And has the resources to be obsessed with the film as well, having, made some of the best animated films of all time. He has a real passion which he's been able to pursue. And so I was taking myself on a holiday. This was 2012, it must have been. I took myself on a holiday during the summer. I hadn't had a holiday from work for ages, and I felt rather tired. So I thought, I know what I need. I need a holiday. And I wanted to go to San Francisco. I'd never been. So I booked a trip to San Francisco and said to Lee, I am coming out to San Francisco. And he wrote back and said, right, I will meet you. Is there any chance you can bring all of your interviews on a hard drive with you?
Oh, wow.
So I took the Elstree Project drive with me to San Francisco, and got the bus from near where the Bay Bridge is in San Francisco, over across to Oakland, and it stops outside Emeryville. And that's where the Pixar Studios is. And I was met by Lee's then assistant, who walked me into Pixar Studios. And of course, I just walked around with my mouth wide open, going, like at everything. Especially as soon as you walk in, there is a very large glass cabinet filled with 1 million Oscars and things like that.
Right.
It's you walk into this huge atrium, and it's just absolutely incredibly impressive. I think at the time it was decorated with all kinds of Celtic knots because they were releasing Brave at the time.
Oh, interesting.
And so
right.
they redecorate that central atrium depending on what film is coming next. And so it was decorated with all these kind of, Celtic kind of designs and knots and things for Brave. And then this guy comes walking towards us, and he says, hello, I'm Lee. Thank you very much. And would you like to see a little bit of the studio? Which of course I said yes. And he gave me a kind of walking tour and said, can we keep your drive for a few days? And that was actually my birthday, the day that I went out there. So that was quite a good birthday present.
Oh, and there you go.
I said, yeah, you can keep the drive for a few days. So they copied, everything on it, I think of. He had his assistant copy everything. And then they gave it back. And so then we carried on talking after I went back home.
I'm just amazed the baggage claim, in the States didn't lose, such precious cargo.
I took that in my hand luggage. I didn't take any risks with that one. I wasn't letting anyone put that in the
Can't
hold.
blame you.
But then, Lee and I carried on talking. So eventually Lee came round to saying he wanted to do a book, on the making of The Shining. And, he'd given me some contacts by that point, people that I'd not been able to find or get in touch with that he'd had success with. I gave him contacts that I'd had success with that he hadn't found. When he came over, when I did this 35th anniversary event, which we called Forever and Ever, the day before we met up with Kelvin Pike, we went to Kelvin's house so that Lee could meet him and borrow his personal scrapbook of photos that Shelley Duvall gave him, so that Lee could scan it and things like that. So Lee and I have become very good friends. We talk very regularly. I would say every week we talk. Every now and then he'll send a text completely out of the blue with a photo that I've never seen of something absolutely amazing, which I'm not allowed to tell anyone about, which is so irritating. But I'm like, what? And the next thing we pick up the phone and start talking about it. And he does things like that. It's brilliant. He's found so much stuff that no one has ever seen on The Shining.
I have to ask. I mean, because not to interrupt, but it's been some time now that there's been word on social media and so forth that Lee is involved heavily with the creation of what may be the definitive book on The Shining. The book
yes.
from of course the inimitable Toshin Publishing. So
that's it. Yeah.
Are you able to share anything at all about when this is coming? Because it's one of those please take our money type things at this point.
Well, it's not my project, so I don't want to overstep the mark. But Lee has already said on Twitter the book is coming. The manuscript has been written, so the text is all written. I've seen one of the most recent drafts of the manuscript, and I was very lucky to be able to even correct something. I felt like I actually had some sort of valuable input where I changed a line. So there we are.
Oh my God! I feel like quoting Monty Python. You lucky bastard.
Well, it comes with having a very sore shoulder for several years from scanning. When we set up this project, and I say Lee actually, when Lee set up this project to do the book, we arranged that he would discuss it with Jan, and then the Kubrick estate, to get permission that he wanted to do the book, but he wanted to do it only if it could be the one with the best access to the archive and do it properly.
Of course.
To the level of the previous Taschen releases. And so that was agreed. And then because of Lee's location and because of my location, Lee arranged that I would be the one on his behalf to go down to the Kubrick archives in London. And I would go down with a list that he'd sent me in an email from the archives directory, with all the right numbers for all the documents that he wanted scanned. And I would spend days there scanning page after page after page after page on their scanner. And so I was in quite a lucky and privileged position, thanks to Lee and thanks to Jan, that because Jan knew me and trusted me and Lee had requested for me to do this, I was allowed actually into the archive itself. Most visitors have to stay outside into the kind of, there's a research area there where people sit. But I was actually given a key fob and allowed to walk into the actual archive room itself and be able to take things off the shelves, and put them on the scanner and scan everything and put them back, and then pick up the next box and scan everything and put it back. And
that's like having the gold headpiece for the staff of Ra in Raiders of the Lost Ark. They gave you a key fob, whereas everyone else is allowed to kind of sift through material and let you scan everything.
I think they only let you scan 12 things as well. So
incredible.
Yeah.
Howard actually knows Ron Punter, who actually does own one of the
staff of Ra.
Yes.
Even more synchronicity. There you go.
There you go. Made at Elstree.
Of course.
But yeah, so look, I was very, very lucky. It wasn't like I had carte blanche. It had to have, Lee had to say to the archive, these are the things Howard's going to look at. But it was a given that the permission had been granted. So I spent almost 5 years, obviously not every day. I was there, for maybe a week every 3 months or 4 months or something like that. And then I go in and do another week. And Lee would come back with another list, and say, can you get this? Can you get that? Can you, see what else there is? And so that's what I was doing, which was a great joy because I got to read and look at all the archive material as well whilst I was scanning it for him. And so I think it's only fair enough I got to read the manuscript, but the manuscript has got lots of interviews, including those Elstree Project interviews that Lee took from me back in 2012. One of the first pages quotes my interview with Christiana Kubrick, which I was greatly honored to, I'm reading this first page and all of a sudden there's words from Christiana that I recognize. And I went, that's my interview. And, so a big honor to have that. But there's lots of other people's interviews that Lee's had permission to include as well. But Lee himself has done his own research. I mean, you introduced me, and it's quite right that on my website it says I'm the lead researcher for this book, which Lee very kindly has allowed that for me to have that credit. But if anyone's the lead researcher, it's Lee. Lee has found the most incredible photographs and material that have never, ever been published. And then down the line, there will be what they call the trade edition, which will be the version that I can actually afford, which I will probably end up buying. And we're going to do a launch. We're going to launch the book. And I was at the 2001 launch that took place at Judikbury, with Jan and Christiana, and that was lovely. And I think the book for 2001, that was around £450, £500. It was in a huge box. And I remember one guy bought about 8 of them to take home on the plane, and I thought he must have booked the whole aisle, in order to accommodate it. But
Right.
Lee and I have spoken. We're going to do a launch. We're going to have a party when the book is launched, because I think now, if I've been working on it probably for about 6 or 7 years, Lee's probably been working on it for maybe 8 or 9 years. So that's a long time. So we need to have a bit of a party at the end of that.
Yeah. Well, real quick, for our listeners, and hopefully we'll get the chance to ask Lee himself this at some point, but for our listeners, could you maybe mention some of the homages to Stanley in Toy Story 2, 3, 4, and 5 now, and of course, and Coco. Of course, we know these, but for our listeners, anything in particular that beyond the shining hexagonal carpet pattern, what else do you see when your eyes cast over shots in his Pixar works?
Well, I know that in Toy Story 3, which was the one that Lee directed, that the screen name, they have an online chat, and the Triceratops character, her screen name includes the numbers 237.
Right.
In her screen name. And yeah, of course, the carpet and things like that. In Toy Story 4, which was directed by Josh Cooley, who I've also got to know, they even have the music, Midnight, the Stars and You is playing, as they go into the antique shop and things like that. So, I mean, I think in Coco, I watched Coco with a fine-tooth cut. I was stopping almost on every shot.
Right.
To look. I was like, where is the Shining reference?
Yeah.
Because I knew he would do it. And I think it completely passed me by. I think there is a shot in the street, where Miguel lives, where they have barrels of red rum.
Okay,
I think
right.
it's that, the barrels are painted red and they've got rum in it. It's that subtle.
Okay,
it was
sure.
But yeah, there's a lot of Shining references that are interwoven throughout Pixar's films. The music in Toy Story 4, the team put that in as a joke, and it was never intended to be used. And Lee had done a pass of the edit. Or I think that's when he first heard it. I can't remember whether he first heard it then or whether he attended a screening. And he was amused by it. It was never going to be in the finished film. And in the end, they bought the rights to use it because they liked it so much.
No, but we are looking for a lost toy. She's a figurine, used to be on that lamp in the window. Name's Bo Peep.
Bo Peep? Oh, yes, I know Bo.
You do?
Hop on in. We'll take you to her.
Oh, you don't have to do that. Well, okay.
Vincent, be careful with our new friends.
Ah, what service?
Thank you for your help. I haven't seen Bo in years.
May I ask, when were you made?
Me? I'm not sure. Late 50s?
Me too. Gee, I wonder if we were made in the same factory. Wouldn't that be something? I gotta say, you are in great condition.
Well, I try to stay active.
And look at that. You have a voice box like me. Vincent, show him.
Oh, that's really not necessary.
Now, I want to jump ahead to 2019, of course, when the BFI held the Kubrick season. And, of course, I was not fortunate enough to attend, but Stephen was, and I'd like to bring him in for part of this question. But the BFI in London, from what we understand, put on a marvelous season to celebrate the films of Stanley Kubrick. And you did attend the festival, of course. Can you tell our listeners about that and some of what were the personal highlights for you?
Sure. When the Kubrick exhibition was coming to the Design Museum, it was obviously natural that there was also going to be a program of screenings, and where better to do that than the BFI. So it was lovely to see that the BFI were going to screen all of Stanley's films, and they were going to dedicate a number of events around that as well with guest speakers. And I had the good fortune to be invited by the family to join them for an evening with Malcolm McDowell, who was in absolutely fine form that evening and was full of wonderful, joyful anecdotes and some very, very entertaining stories about his career and how his path happened to cross with Stanley and on everything that went into the making of A Clockwork Orange.
Sure, and by the way, after that, I was walking down Notting Hill Gate, and there was my friend Ian Holm, and he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going off to do this movie with this Stanley Kubrick, this American." And he went, "Stanley Kubrick? Be careful." Why? He goes, "He's promised you a part, right?" And I went, "Well, yes, he's offered me this part, and we're shooting in a month, I think." And he said, "Well, listen, he offered me Napoleon. 18 months he kept me on a string, and then I couldn't get him on the phone." So I went, well, and then having known Stanley, of course, that makes perfect sense. And anyway, I just thought that...
And so that was a real treat, which I greatly enjoyed, and it was very nice to have been invited to that. And I was there also. There was another event where there was more of a broader launch of the season, in which Katharina and Jan were both on stage guests.
Kirk Douglas was so impressed by Kubrick that he then, who was in charge of Spartacus, really asked Kubrick to take over and direct Spartacus, and many things in Spartacus are absolutely fabulous. It's brilliant. It isn't really a genuine Kubrick film, but it's okay. It's a wonderful film. It was quite tough, wasn't it? Quite tough to stand.
And we all went out as a family, the Kubrick family, and some of the organisers from the Design Museum and the BFI. We all had a very nice dinner afterwards, which I was again allowed to be an interloper, having contributed nothing. So that was a very nice treat. It was a fantastic season. The BFI have a great cinema. They always do these things well. And the Design Museum, the exhibition in the Design Museum, which everyone knows, the traveling exhibit, and it changes depending on who hosts it. And they did a marvelous job of that as well. And I ended up going for the launch of that with the family again, as their guest. And then I went back twice more. I went once with Lee, when Lee came over for a week in the summer, to spend a week at the archive, scanning. He brought with him this most huge Hasselblad drum scanner for scanning film negatives, which he brought with him on the plane, which it's unbelievable, the weight of the thing. And he was there every day during the week, and on the weekend, they're closed. So we went to the Design Museum, and so he got to see the exhibition, and he and I walked around and had a look, and he pointed out numerous errors in things that were being described in the shining part of the exhibit, which was quite fun.
Of course he did.
we still quite haven't got to the bottom of who writes these things. So I need to write to the Frankfurt Film Museum, who are the originators of the whole touring exhibition, and find out whether there is a kind of preset text that they provide to the museums and the hosts, and that's what they use, or whether each place writes their own. I have a feeling it's a bit half and half. But Lee went around and read something and went, that never happened, or that's totally wrong. And
that's amazing.
I was kind of entertaining myself by listening to that because, yeah, I mean, he was absolutely right. And one of the things that always gets on his nerves is the axes that they display, the ones that are kind of half into the wall. And it doesn't ever say what they are. It just says, axe from the film. But they're not they are a special effects axe. It was a deliberate special effects axe,
right?
Which is the one without the tip, so that it had two screws in it, which impact with a bladder that is underneath Scatman Crothers' coat, so that it's filled with prop blood. And when the axe hit it with these two screws that are pointing out, they pierced the bladder and made the blood come out. And also the handle is hollow and has a tube, and the tube goes down to a squib of blood, so that can be squeezed at the same time as the impact happens, so that blood bursts out from the top. So it goes all the way up the handle, through and out into the top of the axe as well. But they don't say that, and it's one of Lee's pet peeves. That these great fun prop axes are there, which actually had a very specific use, not just, here's an axe, he chopped down the door with it, but this is a proper special effects axe. And it's one of Lee's pet peeves. So we had a good old talk about that as well. A few kind of little things that we pick up as we walk around. I've been to the exhibition 3 times now, and twice with Lee. Because the other time with Lee was, of course, in San Francisco. It's always interesting when you go with another expert, and I mean, someone who's even more of an expert, which is such a delight, who can, point out things that you don't know still, and you can still learn from something from that. So that was fun. And then the third time I went back to the Design Museum, I was invited to give the annual Kubrick lecture, which I gave on the subject of The Shining and how The Shining was made.
Well, that thing with Lee and the axes is a really cool anecdote. I mean, in the sense that, if it's a pet peeve of his, he's certainly entitled to it, being an expert. But I mean, we shall not go as far as calling that splitting hairs. Sorry, terrible pun. Sorry.
Not with an axe, anyway.
Not with an axe. That's very difficult. We'd have to be talking about a very large hair.
But yeah, I mean, if it's part of this permanent tour and they are something quite unique, I kind of feel he's right. You need to label it properly. So
I'm inclined to agree. I think we all are. That's it is important. It does matter. I mean, especially when you're talking about archival material from, who we feel is the greatest filmmaker of the 20th century. You're talking about, stuff that does matter. It's not minutia. I had not personally heard that story before. I might have read something about the way that the squib was used and connected within the axe, but the way you described it was fascinating. That's exactly what we're always hoping to be able to bring to the listeners and learn more about ourselves. So thank you. That's great.
Oh, pleasure. And Lee owns the jacket that Scatman Crothers is wearing at the point that he gets the axe through him as well.
Oh.
So.
Okay, of course he does. He probably wears it around San Francisco. Pops into the occasional, it pops into coffee shops to see if the occasional barista says, "Hey, why is there a hole in the front of that jacket?" And that wouldn't happen to be the jacket from The Shining, would it?
I bet and it's not the only one he has. I think he has a few other costumes as well.
Yeah. And I want to ask you about the 2 new video works that you were commissioned to create to showcase 2001: A Space Odyssey. You did work on these materials for the Deutsche Film Museum. Can you tell us and our listeners a bit about the two works that you produced for the exhibition?
Yeah, this was quite a nice surprise to be asked. I knew that the Film Museum in Frankfurt, they were going to be doing a special exhibition where they were going to pull out all of the 2001 material from the touring exhibition and add to it to celebrate the 50th anniversary of 2001. And I hadn't given it much thought other than, that sounds cool, I'd like to go. And then I was approached by them to make two new video pieces, which showcase two different illustrative sides of the film. So one was an illustrator who had actually been on the set and had drawn illustrations of the crew and the cast in costume and behind the scenes in great detail. And there were, I don't know, at least 50 or so of these drawings. And the other set of images were Christiana's alien concept paintings, and ink drawings and pencil drawings and things. And there were, well over 250 of those. And I was asked if I would make a video for each of them, with some kind of movement and fluidity to them, so that it didn't just feel like a kind of slideshow. And so Jan had a concept in mind in which he quite liked this idea of it going into the image and then pulling out, and it's a completely different image, and things like that. So I did my best to incorporate all of those elements into what they were after. I didn't want it to move so much that you didn't get an idea of what it was you were looking at before it changed again. But yeah, I had a lot of fun because it was completely different to what I'd previously made for the exhibition or anything related to my Kubrick work. I had about 4 months to do it. At the same time, there was a video being made by the in-house video team at Warner Brothers in London, who were doing a video in the same manner on the background plates in the desert. So all the original photographs that were taken for the opening scenes in the film of the Nairobi desert, I think it is, they had scans of that at 5,000K, 5K resolution, 5,000 pixels. And I was given the scans of the illustrations and scans of Christiana's art, again, at about 5,000 pixels each. So the files were huge. Yeah, I was just allowed to have a bit of fun. And Jan came and reviewed 3 or 4 different versions, until we got to what they were after and what they were happy with. And it was a real thrill to be able to go to Frankfurt to the launch of the exhibition and see my work there alongside, the designs and work of real genius people who've worked on the film, costume designers and people who, Doug Trumbull and people like that who, people who actually deserve their credit. And there's a screen with my name on it, which I was flabbergasted at and thought how, what an honor, to have that opportunity. So, yeah, it was a real thrill to be asked and approached to do that. Very kind of the family and the museum to trust me with finding a kind of unique way to showcase these images rather than, maybe just printing them and putting them out in a series of frames or something like that.
Well, if I may be so bold, it does sound to me like you've earned the trust that the family and the estate have granted, and I don't think that's presumptuous to say. Your aim is true, and from what I can tell, and I mean, for what my opinion is worth, your heart's in the right place, and that's what it's all about in regards to an ongoing appreciation of Stanley Kubrick. And I think it's great that you've been able to do so much great work to help kind of carry his legacy into the new millennium, because I can speak on behalf of my friends who help, we all produce this together. Well, Stephen produces it. I'm belaboring the point, but I speak on behalf of my friends at Kubrick's Universe when I say that that's what it's all about for us. We do see a certain responsibility, and of course there's a great joy that comes with that responsibility, but there is a mission statement in getting the podcast done right, because whether we like it or not, there will come a point when we've all shuffled off this mortal coil, gone through the Stargate, and gone back to being star children ourselves. And, hopefully there will be a lecturer at some point, way off in the distant future, who says, well, these guys, made this podcast, and, your homework, your assignment, for this week is to listen to episodes, numbers, blah, blah, blah. And, I
can definitely see that happening. Yeah, isn't it just a joy to get to do that kind of thing?
It is. That's what I'm trying to say. It really is, and it's it's our honor in any way to be associated with it, because each of us have come to Stanley Kubrick through our own means and at our own points along the way in life. And I'm sure Stephen and Mark and James, we all do this podcast together. Like I was trying to say, we came to Stanley through our own prisms, if you will. And I know for Mark, it was also The Shining. I'd love to bring you in for a second, Mark, and if you have any thoughts, because we're kind of focusing on The Shining today. Is there anything you want to ask or discuss with Howie? Because of course it is getting close to tea time, and I'm sure you're a bit peckish. We want to let you go soon. Yeah, Mark, are you there?
Yeah, I have one specific question, which is I always have wanted to see the copy of the novel, The Shining, that Stanley marked up and put all his notes in. And I guess my question is, did you see that, Howie? And what I would really love to see is that come out as a special edition with all his notes there, so you can read the novel and then see what Stanley is thinking about it. Thank you, and that's my question.
Oh, wow. There are various versions of the novel in the archive. There was one which I found, which I only saw on my last visit, actually, in the summer when I was with Lee, which was of this incredible version with a very metallic, shiny cover, which I was rather taken with. I thought it was quite a nice design. Why it was in with Kubrick stuff, I'm not sure, because obviously it had been published by that point. And he was looking at the novel before it had even been published. The version that's got his own handwritten annotated notes, from what I've seen, is not bound like a book. It's as if it was kind of given to him as a manuscript kind of document, pre-binding and pre-publishing. And yeah, I've held that, the one with all his personal handwritten notes directly on the page. I've scanned every page of it, and read many of the notes, which are, some of them are extremely astute, and very funny as well. Approaching it from the point of view as from a visual storyteller who is reading a book which obviously is about the written word and written description. And there is some wonderful, wonderful notes where you can instantly see the thought process that he's having about thinking about what's going to work visually on film, and what parts are superfluous. And I don't think they'll ever publish those notes, because some of them are not very complimentary of the text. Because he's of the opinion that they're not going to work for a visual audience, which is the job of a filmmaker, clearly. So it's not that it was a snub or anything like that, clearly, but he was just getting through the system of this works, that doesn't work, that's no good, drop this bit, and also, I like this and I like that. And, my favorite comment of Stanley's on the manuscript, which is where there's page after page after page about how the heating in the hotel works, and it goes on about the boiler and things like this, and eventually Stanley writes in the margin, "Fuck the boiler." and it's my favorite Stanley annotation because it made me like you guys did. It made me laugh. I thought it was hilarious because he'd gone through page after page, just kind of going no, crossing a bit out, no, and then eventually he must have got so pissed off by this thing, he just goes, "Fuck the boiler."
All right, quick follow-up. Diane Johnson said that they boiled down at one point.
No pun intended.
When they were
sorry,
when they're constructing the screenplay, they boiled things down to index cards, and each index card would say what was going to happen in that scene, and then they would bring these to their meetings together and discuss them, and some of them would get thrown out. Are those in the archives?
I have never seen any index cards. I've seen lots and lots of treatments where the ending in particular changes multiple times throughout the treatments. I've seen lots of script drafts where they have completely different endings. There were some of them, the early ones, Scatman Carruthers, his character comes back and he's evil. And ones where everyone gets murdered and things like that, and all sorts of other things going on, and vastly different to what we ended up with. Yeah, I mean, the notes are very, very good, but you can see, you can see very clearly the angle that he's going for in when he's making these notes. You know, it's a very sharp analytical mind who is obviously deciding this works and that doesn't work. Yeah.
Well, and of course, Lee published 3 Polaroids and their respective script pages of the excised final hospital scene. I know
more than 3.
Oh gosh, you're killing me.
I scanned them for him. Yeah.
Oh, you're killing me.
Yeah, there's more than 3. Not that many more, I've got to say. They're continuity Polaroids taken by June Randall. She used to take continuity Polaroids to help her with all the, keeping everything the same. But yeah, there's about, I can't remember how many there are, maybe 7 or 8, or maybe a few more of those scenes.
Is it okay to ask if any of them or all of them will be in the forthcoming Taschen book?
I don't know is the answer. I would assume that there will be some of those images appearing in the Taschen book, but I don't know the answer to that.
Well, any final words on the book about The Shining? Because this is a big one. This is the sort of monolith for The Shining, if you will, for fans and people like us who, read a great deal about Stanley. Any final thoughts you might have about what it was like to be involved and what you anticipate the release to be like?
Yeah, I don't want to overstep the mark because it's Lee's project. I know that the manuscript has been written by Jonathan Rinsler. Jonathan Rinsler was the in-house writer of the making of the Star Wars films for Lucasfilm. And they're probably the highest acclaimed books on the making of those films, because, of course, many have been written, but his are said to be the very best. And he's also written on the making of Alien, and I think he also did Indiana Jones as well. So Jonathan had worked with Lee to write the text of the manuscript. So I'm very, very excited about just how high quality the text is. And also having had the chance to read that, I know it's exceptionally interesting, exciting, and really the detail is, there's so much stuff that every single page there's things that people will never have known about the making of the film. And I cannot praise the research that Lee has done and the knowledge that he has gathered from every single source he can to make that happen. enough. I just think it's really gripping, and it's a very, very exciting book. And he tells the story in a really interesting way that, you know, you want to find out what happened next after you get to the end of a section.
Right.
So yeah, I think the book is a really gripping piece of work. I don't know about the design and layout at all. I don't know what images are going to be included. About 5 years ago, Lee told me that he had about 600 photos from one source that had never been seen before. And that's just from one person. And it was around 500 to 600 photos. And he showed me some of them, and they were amazing. And I know that there will be some of those, and like I said, because I don't know what the content of the images is going to be, I wouldn't be able to put a number on it, but there will obviously be some of those making an appearance in this book. And that's just the little bit that I know, because I know that Lee has so much more, and he has done such an amazing job of bringing together so many different people's personal archives and getting their permission to share the content with the book in the book.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, you know, Toshin should probably make this a coffee table book, and by coffee table book I mean they could literally make it bigger than my coffee table. Just install 4 legs on it. I will throw my coffee table out and put it right in front of my couch.
They have actually done that with a previous book. Jan has it. It comes with its own table. It's an appreciation of Eastern art. And the book is ginormous, and it's so big. It comes with its own table. And yeah, so they've got brilliant form on that. Let's just tell them to do the same.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not like, they're reinventing the coffee table book. They've already done it. And why not do it for The Shining? I mean, if they're going to make it that size, they're going to fetch a pretty penny, as you might say. And, you know, what the hell? I'll sell a kidney.
Well, I did get told how much this Asian art book was. And it had far too many zeros at the end of it. It was a very, very expensive book.
Yeah.
Well, we've spoken a little bit about how everyone came to find Kubrick, and I didn't mention that at all, other than, I started working with the family about 10 years ago. But I've got a nice little story about my upbringing, which may explain and how I have come to all of this, maybe. My father was a Kubrick fan, and when I was 2 or 3 years old and at Sunday school, he came to collect me from Sunday school once, wearing a T-shirt with the poster from A Clockwork Orange on it. And when we got home, my mum told him off for picking us up from a church.
Oh, gosh.
Wearing a Clockwork Orange T-shirt, which had not occurred to him at all. And being the age I was, didn't have a clue what on earth they were going on about.
Right.
And my parents aren't in the least bit religious, so my mum wasn't doing it on those grounds, I think, other than she just was kind of like, you just can't do that, which I thought was rather, thinking back on it, I thought was very funny. But my dad was obsessed. He was an obsessive on 2001. And an obsessive of A Clockwork Orange. And we had 5 copies of the Clockwork Orange soundtrack on vinyl, all of them releases. And he used to play them because he was a big fan of Wendy Carlos as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I grew up with all this strange electronic Beethoven Moog synthesizer stuff from about, the age of 4 onwards, listening to this. And so, and then the first time I watched a Kubrick film, it was because he introduced me to 2001 when I was 8 years old. And then we went to see it at Mayfair, I think in the Curzon cinema, when the new print had just been released on 70mm. I think when I was about 10. But we also had a copy of A Clockwork Orange on VHS, which had been given to him by one of my mum's cousins who are Dutch. and it had been recorded from Dutch TV.
Of course, right.
Where you were allowed to screen it.
Right.
And so I think about the age of 8, I was curious to see what it was, and I put it on. And at the age of 8, I just kind of thought, I don't get it, it's weird. And probably pressed the fast forward button to see if anything exciting happened. But I remember hearing the music again and thinking, I know this. Without, at that age, not really being able to have linked the two.
Yeah, but that's great. I mean, coming to Stanley Kubrick by way of music.
Yeah.
On a personal note, to me, as a lifelong musician and from a family of musical people, that is something that had not quite occurred to me in the way you articulated it, and I think that's fascinating.
I think that was my introduction to Kubrick, was the music. And my dad can say all the words to Ode to Joy in German without knowing what a single word means, because he can't speak a word of German. But because of the soundtrack to A Clockwork Orange,
right,
he knows it. It's hilarious. So my introduction to Stanley Kubrick was through vinyl records and through Wendy Carlos, and through my father's obsession. So I thought you might like that.
I love that. That's great. I completely get that, because great films and great music are kindred spirits in the sense that there is organic breath taking place. It's dynamic passages. It's inhalation and expiration. And you can't, in other words, have everything ratcheted up top notch all the time. And you can't have everything too subdued throughout. But the organic films and music, the ones that truly stand the test of time, not the least of which would be Stanley's, they do breathe.
Yeah. That's it. There's real emotion and story, and that's in the music as well as in the film itself. Yeah, very much so. The narrative is there.
Well, I have one final question, and we love to ask this because there really is no right answer. And if you'd like to take a moment to think of your response, feel free. My final question is, Howie, who is Stanley Kubrick?
Oh, that's a mean question. What's weird is that I have approached the things that I have done related to Stanley Kubrick from the perspective of someone who I wouldn't say was a fan. Because when I started working with Jan and then working with Christiana and doing things with the family and making this oral history, it wasn't because I was a fan. It was because I was interested in how films were made. And so for me, Stanley Kubrick is probably the greatest filmmaker, because every time I watch one of his films, I find something new that I have learned about the art of filmmaking. Anytime I talk to someone, and as you've heard, I've had a great time and the privilege talking to others who were there making the films just as you have, I learn something. And every time I talk to others who appreciate his films, I gain further appreciation too. And it's rare that I know of another filmmaker who I could attribute all of those three things to. So I would say that Stanley Kubrick, for me, is the greatest filmmaker.
I love it.
If that makes any sense or not.
Of course it does. Of course it does. It makes perfect sense. And it's a brilliant response to a rather open-ended question.
A mean question, but I liked it.
Well, that's why I tried to deflate the meanness of it, as you put it, by saying there's no right answer. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. But there is no right answer. And, were there to be one, you've given as, brilliant a right answer, because it's personal. It comes from you. For so many of us, there's a joy to studying, if you will, all manner of films, and there have been many great filmmakers, and then there's Stanley.
Yeah.
And his work, his art.
Yeah. There's a reason why his stuff stands separate from what else is out there.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Howie, on behalf of Kubrick's Universe, our listeners, and especially Stephen Rigg, Mark Lentz, and James Marinaccio, who do this all together, I can't thank you enough for taking your time and sharing your insights with us. This has just been great, a real treat. Thank you, Howie.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Is there anything else anyone would like to say, Stephen and Mark, if you're there?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thanks, Howie. I've been aware of your work probably since around 2015 with the Staircases doc and the 35th Shining event, and it's been lovely to finally get together. And I'd love to hear your dad's version of Ode to Joy, if that's ever possible.
Oh, yes, yes.
I don't think I'd want to torture anyone with that one.
Come on.
No, Howie, this is your mission. You have to record him. Get it. I don't know if you have a Samsung or an iPhone. Just use that little voice memos app. We will put it in the show.
I'll run it through a vocoder for you as well, especially. But
oh my gosh, that's great. That's great stuff. All right, Mark, anything, brother?
Yeah, Howie, I just want to thank you too, and also thank you for being a content creator that us fans get to consume and learn more about our favorite director. I really appreciate the time that you've spent doing that.
It's a lot of fun for me. So it's it doesn't feel like work when you get to have fun, does it?
We will be speaking with director and Shining historian Lee Unkrich very soon, and you will be able to hear more about the new Shining book that you just heard Howie talk about. The limited edition of just 1,000 copies is now on sale directly from the Toshin website. If you haven't, go check out our one-of-a-kind group, the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society, aka SCAS, on Facebook. And beware of imitations and accept no substitutes, for we are a private group with over 25,000 worldwide members and growing. While you're at it, also search for our SCAS YouTube channel. Go check it out. We also have a Kubrick's Universe Facebook page and a new Kubrick's Universe YouTube channel, which we are currently populating with all our previous episodes. We have some marvelous guests coming up in the new year, so stay tuned. Hey, by the way, this show marks the end of our first 5 years. If you've known about us and tuned in all along, thank you. If you've discovered our show while navigating your own hedge maze of Kubrick, well, thank you too. And welcome. We love doing this podcast and bringing it to you, so thank you all for tuning in. We really do appreciate you sharing time with us. On behalf of co-creator, producer, editor, and all-around bon vivant, Stephen Rigg, our research assistants, all past and future collaborators, we hope you had a wonderful holiday season and wish you and yours a very happy new year. I am your host and humble narrator, Jason Furlong, saying thank you again. See you in Season 6 with all the best people.
It's Kubrick's Universe. We just live in it.
We have taken very thorough precautions in this podcast against broadcasting anything which might only be attributed to human error.
These guys aren't scientists. They're making it up as they go along.
Thank you for listening to the Stanley Kubrick podcast. Come back soon.
It was real nice talking to you. Bye. Over and out.
This show comes to you from the Stanley Kubrick Appreciation Society.